My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are continuing our study of the resurrection, and we are focused on the new heaven, new earth, and the new Jerusalem. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because the Abrahamic hope was a new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem, and the resurrection. And because the New Testament writers tell us that the new Jerusalem and the new creation was about to come. Pardon me. Now, look, this may sound a little bit redundant, but I want to go back over some territory because once we catch the power of the interrelationship between the new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem, and martyr vindication, then we can have a whole lot better understanding, number one, of the book of Revelation. Number two, of the nature of the new creation. Revelation chapter 6. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been beheaded for the word of God and the testimony which they held, and they cried out, How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not avenge us on those who dwell on the earth? They're told to rest for a little while. They were given white robes. Until the number of their brethren who should be slain as they were should be fulfilled. Now, let me remind you that Jesus in Matthew chapter 23 said that Israel of his day, Judah, Jerusalem, Israel, I'm using those terms broadly, would fill up the measure of their father's guilt of killing the prophets, killing the saints, and they would be judged in that generation. Simply undeniable. So here in Matthew 23, we have the motif of, God has three cups, okay? Let me put it like this. Actually, he has four. I'm going to talk about three. God has three cups. There's the cup of sin, into which God metaphorically poured the guilt of the sin of his enemies. Generally speaking, not always, it took two different forms, moral sin and sins of violence in persecuting his people. So God had the cup of sin. Then God had the cup of suffering. This is the cup into which God, again metaphorically, poured the blood of his saints who were slain for their faith. Just look at Hebrews chapter 11. Every one of those listed are viewed as being martyrs. Now look, you really got to do a comparison between Matthew 23 and Hebrews chapter 11. And in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, I've got a chart showing the perfect parallelism between Matthew 23 and Hebrews chapter 11 in regard to the vindication of the martyrs. Okay? Get a copy of that book. Go to my websites. Okay. When the cup of sin and the cup of suffering was filled up, God had another cup. That was the cup of wrath. And when both of these other cups are full, God poured out his wrath on the sinners in judgment. So what do we find? In the answer to the prayer of the martyrs of Revelation chapter 6, we find the great and the terrible day of the Lord's wrath. Cup of his wrath is being poured out. This is Revelation 6:12 and following. Revelation 16. Here are the prophets, here are the saints who have been slain by this city, Babylon. And let me remind you, it's where the Lord was slain. And in that judgment, it is the great day of God's wrath. The great day of God's wrath of Revelation chapter 6:12 and following. And the judgment was coming because Babylon had shed the blood of the martyrs. Now, Revelation 20. John said he saw those who had been beheaded for the word of God. They're seated on thrones. They rule and they reign with Christ for 1,000 years. At the end of the 1,000 years, what takes place? Who are these martyrs? Are they a different set of martyrs from those in Revelation 6? Are they different martyrs from those in Revelation 16? In Revelation 6, you have martyrs waiting for vindication at the day of the Lord. Revelation 16, the coming great day of the Lord is the judgment of Babylon to vindicate those martyrs who were waiting. Revelation chapter 20, seated on thrones, waiting for what? The great white throne judgment, which is what? The vindication of their martyrdom. Now, by the way, that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt, folks, the millennium did not begin in AD 70. The martyrs in Revelation chapter 6 received their robes, initial vindication, waiting for the day of the Lord. Oh, wait a minute. We are told by some that the beginning of the millennium was in AD 70. And they were waiting for the day of the Lord. No, I'm sorry. That means you have 2 days of the Lord. If Revelation 21-4 is AD 70, then that is the day of the Lord. They're not waiting for the day of the Lord. But Revelation 6, Revelation 16, and Revelation chapter 20 depict an initial vindication of the martyrs, i.e., white robes being given, being seated on thrones, as they wait for their vindication. When the measure, when the cup of the martyr's blood would be fulfilled at the end of the millennium. And that is when they were vindicated. That is when the old creation passed away. That is when the new creation came. That is when the New Jerusalem came. That is the time of the resurrection. I mean, this really is quite inescapable. Once we see the resurrection within the context and within the framework of martyr vindication, there can be no doubt, with one caveat, okay, unless a person can prove that the vindication of the martyrs, Revelation chapter 6, the vindication of the martyrs, Revelation 16, is a totally different vindication of the martyrs from that in Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following. Unless you could prove that, then the vindication of the martyrs took place at the end of the millennium in the first century. And that means the resurrection took place in the first century. The time of the judgment of Jerusalem, the city where the Lord was slain, the city guilty of shedding all of the blood shed on the earth. So I'll see you on the flip side.